Welcome to Shelter Together. I'm Steve from Jackson Interfaith Shelter, and today we're meeting with Tom Hunsdorfer. He's the chair of the board of Jackson Interfaith Shelter and has extensive experience throughout his career working with homelessness, poverty, international development work, and things like that. So we're excited to join today with Tom. Thanks for being here.
Good to be here. Good to see you.
So starting out, I would love for you to share a little bit about yourself, some of your history with homelessness, some of the work that you've done, and how that shaped your perspective over the years.
Sure. I grew up in New Jersey, and both of my parents were small town kids who served in the military in World War II. So they came back and said, wow, it's a very different world out there, and we want our kids to be involved in the world. So my mother especially helped me get involved in service. She was good about saying, son, get off the couch. We're going to do something.
Okay.
I believed in the parable of the talents. And after my undergraduate work, I got involved with a group called Bread for the World. That was a Christian lobbying group on hunger issues, both international as well as domestic. And a little bit after that, I went to graduate school and then went to work for a hunger program in the Wilmington, Delaware area. And worked with a Franciscan brother. We started a program called the Emmanuel Dining Room that was kind of a soup kitchen. Just on from there, that engagement in hunger and poverty and what was happening to people on the margins of the communities I was in. And that led me to St. Francis House in Boston, which is one of the largest shelter programs in New England. And it started in the mid-1980s when many people were ending up on the streets because of the deinstitutionalization of mental institutions. The idea was, let's get people with chronic mental illnesses back in the community, let them get services at local mental health clinics. And it sounded like a great idea. But there were really, across the U.S. and almost every big city, tens of thousands of people who'd been in institutions a long time were on the street. So many quickly became homeless. Back in the 80s, there were still a lot of what are called SROs, or single room occupancy hotels, where a person who was on the borderline of being homeless could get a simple room. But it was a big problem. There were Vietnam veterans in the mid-'80s who had struggled since coming home. So in Boston, where I was, a lot of them became homeless. We had undocumented people from Central America because of civil wars going on there. So the homeless population that I started out with was very diverse. There were probably 30% of the people we served were from other countries. And many people were trying to figure out, well, what do we need to do beyond just providing shelter? We ended up with a psychiatric nurse working with us for people who had mental health issues. We had substance abuse people. We worked with the Veterans Agency in the area to try to create an actual veteran shelter. So that was sort of really my launch, and I was there for 10 years. And later have done volunteering with shelters, still working on the issues of poverty. I, as you know, have spent a fair amount of time in less developed countries like Mongolia and Peru and Guatemala. So that has helped inform me with what are challenges for humans trying to make a life in all parts of the world. Are there lessons, things we can learn about how people are on the edge of a community get taken care of or don't? So kind of a long answer, but it's been much of my career, and I feel very fortunate to have had the opportunities to work both professionally but also as a volunteer.
And thanks for sharing that. And I know when you were coming onto the board here, that's something I really valued, is not just your domestic experience working with these programs, but I think international experience does matter as well, because I think sometimes we can forget that we're all part of the greater human race, and that a lot of the things aren't unique just to us, but there's things we can learn from other places. So I think that's been a huge asset that you brought to our team here at the shelter. So there were some of the transitions that you talked about with the deinstitutionalization of mental hospitals and things like that. So what are some trends you've seen kind of since that first happened, where many ended up in homeless shelters, and then also many ended up in being incarcerated in prisons and things like that? So then the past couple of decades, are there other trends that you've seen, or is that still kind of the main issue that we're kind of still dealing with, is from that initial decision? Or yeah, what are some things that you've seen more recently?
I have seen, positive change, I think, since I first got involved. Initially, there were missions like the Salvation Army and others that would provide people with a place to sleep and something to eat. But if they needed help with a mental health problem, or just getting documents if they were undocumented, well, you go to this other place. And if you have a need for dental care, that's a different place. So as shelters began to say, okay, it's not just mental illness this person may be dealing with, but a host of other things. And today we are more clear that if we certainly see people as individuals, not, oh, he's homeless, so it must be the same thing as the homeless guy before him had. There are unique circumstances. But many people had some early trauma in their lives, and it could be, for a veteran, it may have been something they experienced in war, or in a household where the father was violent toward their mother. So as we move along beyond just the shelter, we say, okay, what is it that brought people here? One of the things that, as you know, at Jackson Interfaith Shelter, we're looking at, are there things we can do with partners in the community that will reduce the number of people who actually need to come into a shelter? Are there preventative steps we can take? But I think a real evolution has been, okay, not just we're helping you today, you're in the middle of a storm in your life, so here's food, here's a bunk bed, but a more comprehensive approach to a whole human being, and say, how can we work with you? How can we work arm in arm with you to say, okay, are there goals you'd like to achieve? Do you want to get a GED if that was an issue? If you've been drinking for 40 years, do you want to get sober, and how can we help you with that process? So I think today there are different kinds of people coming into shelters than Vietnam War veterans or people from Central America, although there's still some of those. If you're in El Paso today, there's a tremendous problem in sheltering people who are coming up from Central America. But I think if we think of the whole person and say, how can we help you deal with your crisis today, but not think of this as your final resting place? Say, okay, let's get you into housing. Let's help you be more self-reliant and take back control of your own life. So I think all shelters around the country have a learning process to go through.
Are there any best models that you've seen, or certain shelters, maybe it's the one that you're at in Boston, or others that you feel like we're doing those pieces better than others, or that we could continue to learn from?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think that what's happening now at Jackson Interfaith Shelter is a big step in the right direction of meeting individuals where they are, of helping them get a plan together, whether it's treatment that they need or steps they need to take to get back into the employment world. I think what worked, but it took us a while at St. Francis House, was to be a multi-service center for people experiencing homelessness, to try to have a number of things under one roof. But if we didn't have it to know who the partners were and to have really positive relationships, whether it's with the VA or whether it's the community action agency there, say, okay, we don't have to do everything. There are other people who are handling housing. I think the issues that a woman who's experiencing domestic violence, who may be here with 2 children, her issues are very different than the older single chronic alcoholic, or somebody who's here because they had a fire in their home and don't have anywhere else to go. So that looking at a spectrum of services, figuring out what a given shelter can do best on its own, but then how you partner. But with the goal of that being here at Jackson Interfaith Shelter, we love you, we're glad you're here, we want to give you the time you need, but this is not the final stop.
Yep.
We want to help you get out of here and have a richer life that you have more control over.
With the different experiences that you've had personally growing, because I'm sure you've had an evolution in your own, thinking and experientially, both domestically doing things, but also internationally. And I know you also have done a lot in Haiti and work with the Haiti Nursing Foundation. But are there, I guess, maybe perspectives that you've grown in over time, personally, like maybe ways that you used to think that you've adapted and changed? And then along with that, are there things that frustrate you when you maybe do some international work or domestic work with maybe a perspective that maybe our culture has, that you think we could learn from or grow in? Sorry, it's kind of a long question, but sure.
Yeah, certainly there has been a lot of learning for me. When I was in my 20s, not all, but some people in the 20s, particularly males, I know the answer is this is a task, I can do it, and I will just work harder and I will do it. And okay, that didn't work, and periodically, God would tap me on the shoulder and in very polite language say, "You're an idiot, stop doing that, listen." So even just listening was really important. What was the other part of your question?
So yeah, partly how have you grown, but also I guess, working with groups that are doing international work, or even working with those that do things on homelessness, and also maybe things that the media puts out on homelessness and things like that. Are there things that sometimes don't agree with that perspective, or things that you think we should grow in? Yeah,
I think sometimes the media seeks something that's spicier, and so that either people experiencing homeless are portrayed as they are noble, terrible things have happened to them, and it's the government's fault, or it's somebody's fault, or they're terrible, they're winos, they're IV drug users, we don't want them in our neighborhood, but there's not a more nuanced,
one extreme or the other,
whole way of really seeing where people are. So I think really listening to people in a profound way is important. Just to shut my mouth and listen really hard and deeply mattered, and keep asking one more part.
I think part mostly hits on it, but
part of what I saw internationally was, I think in the U.S., most people are incredibly generous and they really want to help. But it's this sort of impulsive thing, and because we are a bit of a materialistic culture, it's okay. A hurricane hit Haiti, an earthquake hit Haiti, so we've got to do something, so let's send them clothing. And let's get our University of Michigan winter down coat out that we're not using anymore, and send it to a place where it's always 88 or 100 degrees and humid, without pausing, okay, do they need down coats, or is there a different response? So I think we're still learning as a culture, instead of always giving stuff, sometimes it's good to give money to people who may be more directly involved. But I think, again, to pause, to be respectful of the person, and to hear their story, and then say, okay, would you like us to work with you? And then what are you going to do? I think sometimes to not have expectations of people who are experiencing homelessness is sort of disrespectful of them. Say, okay, we've got some rules here at the shelter. And if you've been, drinking for a long time, and you're using profanity all the time, but you want to get a job in an organization where that may not work, then you can do some work on some of those things. So I think that kind of respect of other human beings, to think they can do some of this with us.
Haiti giant coat example. That's a
there
fantastic example.
The term they use down there is junk for Jesus. Let's grab everything out of our closet and put it in a shipping container.
Good intentions. So with you being a part of our board, a lot of times when we do this podcast, we'll be interviewing people from maybe not that are part of the shelter, but with the role that you have, would you mind hitting on a little bit of just kind of some direction that you see for the shelter, for the board, and even hit on, some of the people that we brought onto the board and the intentionality behind how we brought some people from different organizations on?
Yeah, we are in the midst of a big change at Jackson Interfaith Shelter, and I think it's a very positive change. We're in a new chapter of the life of the organization. Part of treating people with respect is to have a physical structure that communicates welcome and that communicates respect, so that it's not going to be dirty and dark and dingy when you come here, but it's going to be clean, and you'll say, "Wow, is this for me?"
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a nice place. The board is taking a more active role in the life of the organization. We are responsible to the community. It is the people of Jackson who ultimately said, yes, we want to take care of homeless people in our community. For 50 years, churches and individuals have been financially supportive of this way. So we represent them. We represent people experiencing homelessness. We've hired a guy like you, and we want to hold you accountable that there's good work being done here. We are looking harder at, okay, what is it that brought people here, and how do we help? And we, as you know, we have a partnership with an organization called My Place. And this is working with young women coming out of the foster care system so that they don't become homeless. But what we've tried to do on the board is bring people on who not only care about the mission that we have, but who have maybe a background, a skill set, an organizational affiliation, that we have strength and diversity among the board. I've been on a lot of nonprofit boards, and often it's, ask 3 of your friends, would you be on the board with me? We desperately need somebody, and you be the secretary, but not say, okay, does that really help the organization think and plan? So we have our Vice President Sherry Good is a mortgage banker. Our secretary is Wendy Clow, who's the head of Habitat for Humanity in Jackson. So she brings experience from another corner of the nonprofit world and has to do with housing. And she really knows the city of Jackson. Our treasurer is a guy named Ken Seneff, who is one of the co-founders of the Lean Rocket Lab, which does entrepreneurial work, which helps people start business. And he has good insights on, okay, if there are people who are homeless right now at the shelter, but who may want to start a business, we can partner there. One of our newer board members is Carl Hunt, who is a local independent contractor. And he's really connected in the community, is helping us think about our structures. We have a little unusual for a shelter board. We have a sergeant from the police force, Pete Postma, who works nights and often sees people at their worst out here in the streets, and he brings insights. How can we have a safer neighborhood? Pastor Jason Engel from Jackson Free Methodist brings a spiritual component, because when we are working with the whole person, they may have physical needs for food, for a roof over their heads. They may have psychological issues they've got to deal with, those early traumas, but they also have spiritual needs. They are maybe feeling spiritually lost, and having clergy and connections with churches makes a difference. So Jason helps us with that. I know I'm forgetting a few. A newer member is Neil Fernandez, who is the CEO of Rise Above, and it's working with children in the community who've maybe been booted out of the public schools for one reason or another. That's an alternative way for them to get education. But what we as the board are trying to do is support a strategic plan that really keeps us growing, to help us think about, are we doing the best we can? I would love it if 2 or 3 years from now, Jackson Interfaith Shelter was recognized statewide or nationwide as a model shelter. So we want to keep the foot on the gas. We want to think really hard about, how can we be a good neighbor in the part of Jackson where we are? Are there other services we could add? People have been generous with us, so we have some financial resources now. So in the next few months, we're coming out with a new strategic plan, and Steve will have more work to do.
That's right. Hold my feet to the fire. And then Cassie recently came on
Cassie
too, and
Watson,
I really appreciate
that's right.
her partnership with Lifeways Mental Health, and I think that's a big piece. And with you kind of talking about the history of the mental health with homelessness, that's something that a year or so ago we really just dug in and said that needs to be a perspective that's constantly before us and somebody that's an expert in that. So we appreciated having her on the team as well.
And between board members and key staff people that you have, we want to have good relationships with the city of Jackson. The city is an important partner in addressing homelessness, in providing affordable housing, which is a key issue for the greater Jackson area. We want to have good relationships with other major nonprofits, with the faith community, with really anybody who wants to be a partner in our work. We're lucky in that we have incredible donors and volunteers. So it's the whole community of Jackson that we're trying to represent and have a plan for. Ideally 5 years from now, it would be great if there were 50% fewer homeless people.
Absolutely.
If we could put ourselves out of business, fantastic.
Yep. Exactly. Well, I think kind of as we come to a close, are there, I guess, any other things that you'd want to share just about your perspective or, an encouragement for people how to best get involved, or just, kind of anything wrapping up that you want to share?
Certainly, I would encourage people who want to be in partnership with an organization that serves the homeless, check out our website or come here, see for yourselves. I often sort of trust my eyes and my own sense so that when I walk in the door of the shelter, I get a feel for how things are going.
Yep.
Some people do great at helping serve a meal here. Others write a check. Others help with a clothing drive at the times of the year when we need that. I think there is an evolution in the issues that are bringing people into shelters. I see more young women and sometimes young men who have young children who are here, and the needs of those children are very different than, again, a 70-year-old chronic alcoholic has. We are seeing people who are transgender and who are maybe dealing with discrimination in housing because of how they appear or just the way they are living their lives. And we want to be welcoming and respectful to all kinds of people. Sometimes the issues that are happening on our southern border make their way here. So if there are people who don't speak English who need support. So I think we need to be flexible. We need to really use both ears and hear what's happening and remember our mission statement. I wrote it down, but I could probably recite it. But seeking to put God's love into action, Jackson Interfaith Shelter provides temporary shelter and other essential resources for people experiencing homelessness and poverty or poverty. Our mission is not just people who need a roof for a meal today, but people in the community who maybe need a meal, or maybe they just really need a listening ear and advice. So, but I think we are a good partner in addressing these problems in our community. And if we always keep forward our mission and what the needs are of homeless families and homeless individuals, we'll get there.
Well, thank you for taking the time, and thanks for serving on the board. That's a often thankless job, and you make $0 doing it. So instead of taking your retirement and just traveling and driving golf carts around Florida, we appreciate that you use what you've learned over the years and the way that you've been shaped to pour into people's lives. And so it really means a lot, and you've been a huge encouragement to me. And thanks for the work, the way that you serve the families of Jackson.
Well, it's great to be part of this. Thank you.
Thanks.